Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging into, well, a really ancient text, one that often seems a bit mysterious, maybe even intimidating, but it's packed with surprises. We're talking laws about everything, religious sacrifice, sure, but also public health, economics. It paints this incredibly vivid picture of a society. Our source material today is drawn from key parts of the book of Leviticus, giving us a direct look into how this community was structured.
Yeah, and our goal really is to unpack these directives. We want to get under the skin of what they meant for people day to day. How did this idea of holiness actually shape their lives? It's pretty fascinating how deeply it all connects.
Okay, let's unpack this then. The first thing that, well, it just jumps right out is the incredible detail about the offerings. I mean, it's not vague at all.
No, not at all. What's striking is that precision and the sheer variety. This isn't just, a simple transaction. It's a really structured system. It's designed for things like atonement, dedication, and communion with the divine.
So like the burnt offering, that one seems intense.
It really was. Leviticus 1 describes it had to be a male animal from the herd or flock, maybe birds if you were poor, but always without any defect. And the unique part, after preparation, skinning, cutting, washing the entire thing was burned on the altar.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. The text says it creates an aroma pleasing to the Lord. It symbolized sort of a total dedication, a complete surrender for atonement, really shows their idea of wholehearted worship.
Okay, total dedication there.
Yeah.
But then you have the grain offering in chapter 2. That's different, right? No animals involved.
Right, exactly. No animals, just fine flour, oil, incense. And here, unlike the burnt offering, the priest only burns a part of it, a memorial portion.
A memorial portion.
Yeah, as an offering to God. The rest actually went to the priests. It symbolized giving back a portion of your harvest, acknowledging God's provision.
And there were specific rules there, too.
Oh, yes. Crucially, no yeast. Generally, yeast often symbolized corruption or puffing up. Purity was key, and always seasoned with salt.
Salt. Why salt?
It's called the salt of the covenant. Salt preserves, it endures. So it symbolized the lasting, unbreakable nature of their covenant relationship with God.
Interesting. Okay, then we get the fellowship offering, chapters 3 and 7. That one sounds, well, almost sociable.
It really was. That's the unique thing about it. It was genuinely a shared experience. Yes, specific fat portions seen as the best part were burned for God, but a big chunk of the animal was actually eaten by the priests and by the person who brought the offering.
Like a meal together.
Exactly, like a celebratory meal. It signified peace, fellowship restored, maybe thanksgiving, connection with God and with each other.
But even their strict rules applied.
Absolutely. Two big ones. No eating the fat that belonged to God, and critically, no eating the blood.
Why not the blood?
The text is explicit. The life of a creature is in the blood, so consuming blood was forbidden, a lasting ordinance underlining the sanctity of life itself.
Makes sense. Okay, so what happens when someone, messes up, but maybe didn't mean to?
Mm-hmm.
The sin offerings in chapters 4 and 5 seem to cover that.
That's precisely their purpose. For unintentional sins, things done wrong that still brought guilt and needed resolving to restore your standing.
And it wasn't just one size fits all.
No, and that's fascinating. It varied based on who sinned. If it was the high priest or the whole community, it required a young bull, a significant offering. A leader needed a male goat, a regular community member, a female goat or lamb. It acknowledged different levels of responsibility, you see.
Ah, okay. And the ritual itself?
Involved careful handling of the blood, some put on the altar horns or sprinkled near the curtain in the sanctuary. The fat was burned. But a key thing, especially for sins by the priest or the whole community, parts of the animal, like the hide and flesh, had to be taken outside the camp and burned there.
Outside? Why?
Symbolizing the complete removal of sin and defilement away from the sacred space and the community. The result, always, was atonement and forgiveness.
And there's another one called a guilt offering. Is that just another name for the sin offering or something else?
It's related but distinct. The guilt offering in chapters 5 and 6 was often for specific violations against sacred things, or, importantly, when you deceived or defrauded your neighbor, like keeping lost property or lying about a deposit.
So when you wronged someone else directly.
Exactly. And the key element here was restitution. You couldn't just make the offering. You had to pay back what you took or defrauded, plus add an extra fifth of its value.
Wow, so paying it back plus 20%.
Right, to the person you wronged or to the priest if it was about sacred items. It really emphasizes that atonement wasn't just spiritual. It involved making things right in the community, tangible justice.
And none of this could happen without the priests, obviously. The sources go into a lot of detail about the regulations, their ordination, chapters 6, 8, 9, 10.
Oh, absolutely. Their role was critical. For instance, the altar fire had to be kept burning continuously, day and night.
Why continuously?
It symbolized the perpetual nature of worship, God's constant presence, the ongoing need for atonement. It was a constant reminder.
And their ordination, Aaron and his sons, that sounded like quite the process.
It was a rigorous 7-day ceremony. Washing, dressing in special sacred garments, tunic, sash, robe, the ephod, the breastpiece with the Urim and Thummim, the turban, then anointing with special oil. Specific offerings were made, and blood was applied to their right earlobe, right thumb, and right big toe.
Ear, thumb, toe, what did that signify?
Symbolized their whole being, hearing God's word, the work of their hands, the path they walk being consecrated entirely to God's service.
And the text highlights the danger of getting it wrong, doesn't it, with Nadab and Abihu?
Tragically, yes. Chapter 10 tells how they offered unauthorized fire, something God hadn't commanded, and they died instantly. It's a stark lesson on the absolute necessity of approaching the holy precisely as instructed.
A serious business.
Very. And priests were also forbidden from drinking wine or fermented drink when serving in the tent of meeting. They needed clear minds. Why? To distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the unclean and the clean, and crucially, to teach the Israelites all these decrees. They were guardians of holiness and teachers of the law.
Okay, this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. We've got these formal rituals, the offerings, the priesthood, but then this idea of holiness or purity seems to spread out into, well, almost every part of daily life. These rules about clean and unclean, they cover food, illness, even bodily functions. How do these seemingly everyday rules fit into that bigger picture of holiness?
That's a great point. And you're right, they're not just random regulations. If you connect them to that central idea of holiness, you see they create this really meticulous framework for living. It's about distinguishing the community, setting them apart, and maintaining a state of ritual purity that was considered essential for being in relationship with a holy God. It's about drawing boundaries.
Boundaries. Okay. Like the dietary laws in chapter 11. Those are pretty well known.
They are, and the principle is quite specific. For land animals, the key was 2 criteria. They had to have a completely split hoof and chew the cud.
Both things.
Both. So cattle, sheep, goats, they fit. But animals that only had one trait, like a camel that chews the cud but doesn't have a split hoof, or a pig that has a split hoof but doesn't chew the cud, they were out. Unclean.
Okay, specific criteria for land animals. What about fish or birds?
Similar idea. For things in the water, they needed both fins and scales to be clean. Anything else, like shellfish, was considered detestable. And for birds, instead of a rule, it lists specific types that were forbidden birds of prey, scavengers, certain water birds, eagles, vultures, owls, storks, a whole list.
Even insects.
Even insects. Most flying insects that also walk on 4 legs were detestable. The exception was those with jointed legs above their feet for hopping on the ground, like locusts, crickets, grasshoppers. Those were okay.
It's incredibly specific. It went beyond just eating them, right? Touching carcasses.
Yes. Touching the carcass of an unclean animal made a person ritually unclean until evening, and they usually had to wash their clothes. And it even affected objects. If a dead, unclean creature, say a mouse, fell into an earthen pot, the pot had to be broken. If it fell on clothing or wooden items, they had to be washed. It shows how pervasive this idea of contamination and purity was.
Wow. Okay, so diet, contact.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there. There are these extensive rules about bodily discharges, chapters 12 and 15. That seems very personal, affecting daily interactions.
It does, and it underscores how embodied their understanding of purity was. These rules were, again, very specific, aimed at maintaining the ritual purity needed to be near God's presence.
Like after childbirth.
Right. After childbirth, a woman was considered ritually unclean for a set period longer for a daughter than a son, interestingly. Then there was a further period of purification before she could touch sacred things or enter the sanctuary. Offerings were needed afterwards for atonement.
And for men.
For men, an unusual bodily discharge also made him unclean. Anything he lay on, sat on, even rode on became unclean. Anyone touching him or those items also became unclean. There was a 7-day cleansing process, bathing, washing clothes, and then offerings. Even a normal seminal emission resulted in uncleanness until evening, requiring bathing.
And for women's regular cycles.
Similar rules. During her monthly period, a woman was unclean for 7 days. Anything she lay or sat on became unclean, as did anyone touching her or those items. Same logic applied if she had a discharge outside her normal period. After it stopped, there was a 7-day cleansing, bathing, washing clothes, and offerings.
It seems like a lot to manage. What was the overall purpose stated for these rules?
The text itself gives the reason. It was to keep the Israelites separate from things that make them unclean, so they will not die in their uncleanness for defiling my dwelling place. The dwelling place, the tabernacle, represented God's presence. Uncleanness couldn't coexist with that holiness. It was about protecting that sacred space.
That makes sense. Then you have the laws about infectious skin diseases, chapters 13 and 14. This section reads almost like, well, an ancient public health manual.
It really does function that way. It's fascinating. The priests acted as diagnosticians, examining swellings, rashes, sores, boils, burns. They looked for very specific signs: white hair in the sore appearing deeper than the skin, raw flesh appearing, or if the condition was spreading. These were key indicators of a serious unclean condition, often translated as leprosy, though it likely covered a range of diseases.
And if it was diagnosed as unclean?
Isolation. The person was typically isolated for 7 days, then re-examined, sometimes another 7 days. If confirmed unclean with an infectious disease, the consequences were significant.
What do they have to do?
They had to live alone outside the camp. They had to wear torn clothes, let their hair be unkempt, cover the lower part of their face, and shout, "Unclean! Unclean!" wherever they went.
Wow. A clear warning to others.
A very clear signal to maintain distance, protecting the community from both ritual defilement and physical contagion.
But what if someone got better? Could they rejoin the community?
Yes, there was a way back. Chapter 14 details a quite elaborate multi-stage cleansing ritual for someone healed. It started outside the camp with a priest using 2 live clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet yarn, and hyssop. One bird was killed over fresh water in a clay pot. The live bird, wood, yarn, and hyssop were dipped in the blood and water, and the person being cleansed was sprinkled 7 times. Then the live bird was released into the open field.
Symbolizing what? Release from the affliction.
Likely release, perhaps carrying the impurity away. Then the person washed their clothes, shaved off all their hair, and bathed. They could enter the camp, but had to stay outside their tent for 7 more days.
It wasn't over yet.
Not quite. On the 7th day, they shaved again, all hair, head, beard, eyebrows, washed clothes, bathed again. Then on the 8th day, they brought specific offerings: lambs, grain, oil. There were even provisions for poorer people who couldn't afford lambs. And the priest performed a final ritual, applying some of the blood and oil from the offerings to the person's right earlobe, right thumb, and right big toe.
The same spots as the priest's ordination.
Exactly. Symbolizing their full restoration and reconsecration to participate fully in the community life again, making atonement for them.
It's incredibly thorough.
Yeah.
And it didn't just apply to people. The sources mention mildew in clothing and houses, really.
Yes, really.
Yeah.
Chapters 13 and 14 again. This concept of uncleanness or contamination extended even to buildings and belongings. If a greenish or reddish infection appeared in wool, linen, or leather items and it was spreading, it was considered destructive mildew.
Then what do they do?
Isolate it for 7 days. If it had spread, the item had to be burned. If it hadn't spread, it was washed and re-examined. If it reappeared, burned. If it faded, the affected patch was torn out.
And houses, how did that work?
If someone saw what looked like mildew in their house, they had to report it to the priest. Crucially, they emptied the house first, so the contents wouldn't be declared unclean if the house was. The priest examined it. Greenish or reddish depressions, appearing deeper than the surface. If suspected, the house was closed up for 7 days.
Come on.
Re-examined. If it had spread, the contaminated stones were removed, the inside wall scraped all around, and the debris dumped in an unclean place outside the town. New stones and plaster were put in.
And if it still came back?
Then the house was declared unclean and had to be completely torn down: stones, timber, plaster, everything taken to an unclean place. It was considered an incurable contamination.
But if removing the stones worked?
Then, just like for a person, there was a cleansing ritual for the house. Using the 2 birds, cedar, scarlet yarn, hyssop, similar procedure. Sprinkling the house 7 times, releasing the live bird, making atonement for the house, declaring it clean.
It really shows how seriously they took any potential contamination, anything that threatened the purity of their space.
Exactly. Whether it was personal health, clothing, or the very structure they lived in, it all tied back to maintaining that state of ritual cleanness required for the community dwelling with God.
So, okay, we got the rituals, the purity rules, but Leviticus also has a huge focus on just how people should live together, day to day. What does it tell us about their core values, how they were supposed to interact?
Well, this really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? It raises that important question. How do these laws actually forge a unique identity, a community that's distinct? The text itself mentions they shouldn't follow the ways of Egypt or Canaan, so it's all about establishing this holy nation. And the
Yeah.
foundation stone for all of it is that command in chapter 19, be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy.
Be holy because I am holy.
Yeah.
That's a really high bar. I mean, how practical was that for an entire nation?
Yeah.
How did the laws try to make that real in everyday life?
It is a high standard, absolutely. But the laws break it down into tangible actions, into boundaries. You see strong prohibitions on idolatry and practices common in surrounding cultures. No making idols, no carved stones for worship. A really severe prohibition against sacrificing children to the god Molech, punishable by death. No consulting mediums or spiritists, again, punishable by death. No divination, no sorcery.
So a clear rejection of pagan practices.
A very clear rejection. Even things that might seem minor to us, like specific prohibitions on cutting your body for the dead or getting tattoos or certain ways of trimming hair and beards, these likely served as visible markers, setting them apart from neighbors who did those things, establishing difference.
There are also rules against mixing things.
Yeah.
Animals, seeds, fabrics.
Yes, chapter 19 mentions not mating different kinds of animals, not planting a field with two kinds of seed, not wearing clothing woven of two kinds of material. The reasons aren't fully spelled out, but it seems to tie into maintaining the distinct orders of creation as God established them, keeping things separate and distinct, reflecting God's own holiness.
Okay. Then there's the section on sexual morality in chapters 18 and 20. It's very extensive and pretty stark. What's the main message there?
It is extensive and, yes, very direct. The core message is about protecting the sanctity and integrity of the family unit and the community as a whole, defining clear boundaries for sexual relationships. There's a long list forbidding sexual relations based on close kinship, essentially. Incest laws, covering relations with parents, step-parents, siblings, grandchildren, in-laws, aunts, uncles, wives.
Right, defining family boundaries.
Exactly. Plus, prohibitions against relations during a woman's menstrual period and against adultery. And the text explicitly condemns male same-sex relations as detestable, making it punishable by death.
And bestiality, too.
Yes, bestiality is also forbidden for both the human and the animal involved, and also carried the death penalty.
And the text links these actions to the land itself.
It does, repeatedly. These actions are called wickedness and perversion. Chapter 18 warns that these practices defiled the previous inhabitants of Canaan, causing the land itself to vomit them out. The implication is clear. Maintaining moral purity was essential for their right to live in the Promised Land. It connects morality directly to national well-being and stability.
Okay, but it's not all just prohibitions and punishments. There's also this really strong thread of justice and social responsibility running through, especially in chapter 19. It seems quite balanced in that way.
You're absolutely right. That's what's so compelling. Alongside the strict boundaries, there's this robust, positive ethic for how the community should function, prioritizing fairness and compassion.
Like what, specifically?
Well, you have foundational commands. Respect your mother and father, keep the Sabbath. Then very practical social justice. When you harvest your fields, leave the edges and any fallen gleanings for the poor and the alien, the foreigner living among you.
So built-in support for the vulnerable.
Exactly, acknowledging their right to sustenance. Then, basic ethical conduct. Don't steal, don't lie, don't deceive one another, don't defraud or rob your neighbor.
Fair treatment for workers, too.
Yes, very specific. Do not hold back the wages of a hired worker overnight. Pay people promptly, and deep compassion is mandated. Do not curse the deaf or put a stumbling block in front of the blind. And significantly, it adds, fear your God, linking ethical action directly to reverence for God.
And the call for impartial justice is really powerful.
It is. Do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. That's a cornerstone of a just society, isn't it? Treating everyone equally under the law.
It really is. And it gets into personal relationships, too.
Deeply. Do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. And then this. Do not hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so you will not share in his guilt. Open, honest communication, even correction, is encouraged.
And then the really famous one.
Right. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. That's just foundational.
And it explicitly includes the non-Israelite living there.
Yes. When a foreigner resides among you in your land, do not mistreat them. The foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native-born. Love them as yourself, for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. It's a radical call to inclusion and empathy, grounded in their own historical experience.
That's remarkable. And other things, too, like fair business practices.
Yep. Do not use dishonest standards when measuring length, weight, or quantity. Use honest scales and honest weights. Basic integrity in all dealings. And finally, rise in the presence of the aged, show respect for the elderly, and revere your God. Honoring elders is part of this whole picture of a righteous community.
But for really serious violations, the consequences mentioned could be extreme. The sources list various capital punishments. What does that tell us?
It tells us that certain actions were seen as so fundamentally destructive to the covenant relationship and the holiness of the community that they demanded the ultimate penalty.
Which offenses fell into that category?
Sacrificing children to Moloch, we mentioned that. Cursing one's parents. Adultery. Various forms of incest listed in chapter 20. Male same-sex relations. Bestiality. Practicing mediumship or spiritism. Blaspheming God's name.
And murder.
And murder, of course. The principle often cited is life for life. Chapter 24 also mentions fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, representing the principle of proportionate justice, though its exact application is debated. But it shows a system where severe actions had severe, divinely mandated consequences.
Okay, so personal conduct, social justice.
Yeah.
But then there are these incredible systems built into the laws concerning land and time, the Sabbath year, the Jubilee year. What was the thinking behind those? How do they fit in?
Yeah, well, what's really fascinating here is how these calendar and economic rules are woven right into the fabric of their society. It's this profound statement that ultimately the land belongs to God, and even the people belong to God. It establishes these cycles of rest, release, and restoration that are meant to reflect God's own patterns and prevent permanent inequality or exploitation.
Starting with the weekly Sabbath.
Yes, the Sabbath day, the seventh day. A complete rest from regular work, a day for sacred assembly. It baked this rhythm of work and rest right into their week, a constant reminder of God as creator and provider.
And then there were the annual appointed feasts, laying out a yearly cycle.
Exactly. Chapter 23 outlines them. You have Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread in the spring, remembering the Exodus from Egypt. Then the Feast of First Fruits, offering the first sheaf of the barley harvest, followed 50 days later by the Feast of Weeks, or Pentecost, celebrating the wheat harvest with larves baked with yeast, interestingly.
A harvest festival.
Yes. Then in the fall, the Feast of Trumpets, a call to attention leading into the most solemn day, the Day of Atonement, a day of fasting, self-denial, and national atonement for sin. And finally, the Feast of Tabernacles, or Booths, a week-long harvest celebration where they lived in temporary shelters made of branches, remembering their ancestors' journey through the wilderness after Egypt. These feasts tied their year to their history and their agriculture, all centered around God.
And it wasn't just people resting. The land itself got a Sabbath. That seems really radical.
It is radical, especially for an agricultural society. Chapter 25 lays out the Sabbath year, or Shemitah. Every seventh year, the land had to rest completely.
Meaning what exactly?
No sowing fields, no pruning vineyards, no harvesting crops that grew on their own from the previous year's dropped seeds, nothing.
So, how did people eat?
What grew naturally, the volunteer crops, was available for everyone to gather and eat. The landowner, their servants, hired workers, resident aliens, even livestock and wild animals. It was a year of reliance on God's provision and a powerful statement about stewardship, letting the land recover.
And then, building on that cycle of 7, the year of Jubilee, even more profound.
Even more profound, yes. After 7 cycles of 7 years, so in the 50th year came the Jubilee, it was announced with the blast of a trumpet on the Day of Atonement.
And its main principle.
Proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It was a year of release. Everyone was to return to their ancestral family property, return to their clan.
So land that had been sold went back.
It went back. The text states explicitly, the land must not be sold permanently because the land is mine and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers. God is the ultimate owner. The Israelites are tenants.
So buying and selling land was more like leasing.
Exactly. The price was calculated based on the number of harvests remaining until the next Jubilee. It was an incredible mechanism designed to prevent the permanent accumulation of land in the hands of a few and the creation of a landless class. It ensured families retained their ancestral inheritance over the long term.
This sounds like it had huge implications for preventing deep poverty, too. And there were other rules about that. Redemption of property, treatment of the poor.
Absolutely. The system was designed with safety nets. If someone became poor and had to sell their land, a near relative had the right, even the responsibility, to buy it back for them, the kinsman redeemer. Or if the original seller became prosperous again, they could redeem it themselves, paying based on the years left until Jubilee. If it wasn't redeemed by then, it reverted automatically in the Jubilee year.
Did that apply to houses too?
Mostly. Houses in unwalled villages were treated like land redeemable and returned in Jubilee. But houses in walled cities were different. You had only 1 year to redeem it. If you didn't, the sale was permanent and it didn't return in the Jubilee. Perhaps reflecting a different view of urban property versus ancestral farmland. Houses in Levite cities, however, were always redeemable and returned.
And how were the poor, especially those who fell into debt, supposed to be treated?
With compassion. Fellow Israelites were commanded not to charge interest on loans of money or food given to poor countrymen. They were to be helped and supported.
What if someone became so poor they had to sell themselves?
If an Israelite sold himself into servitude to another Israelite, he was not to be treated like a permanent slave. He was to be treated as a hired worker or a temporary resident.
And released when?
He and his children were to be released in the year of Jubilee to return to their family property and clan, the reason given. Because the Israelites are my servants whom I brought out of Egypt. They belong ultimately to God, not to human masters permanently.
But that was different for non-Israelites.
Yes, the text does make a distinction. It says they could acquire slaves from surrounding nations or from foreigners living among them, and these could be treated as property and passed down as inheritance. So that liberty principle of the Jubilee didn't automatically extend to non-Israelite slaves in the same way.
Okay. And finally, in this section, there are rules about vows and dedications in chapter 27. How does that fit in?
It basically provides an orderly system for people who wanted to dedicate something themselves, an animal, a house, a piece of land to the Lord's service, often as a vow. It sets out standardized values for people based on age and gender, payable in silver shekels if someone dedicated a person, or themselves, and then wanted to redeem them. It also covers dedicated animals. If it was an animal acceptable for sacrifice, it became holy and couldn't be substituted. If it was an unclean animal, it had to be redeemed at its assessed value plus a fifth or sold.
In land.
Similar idea. A priest valued dedicated land. It could be redeemed by adding a fifth to the value. If not redeemed, it became the priest's property in the Jubilee, unless it was part of the person's ancestral land, in which case it reverted to the family. There is also a sobering note. Anything devoted to destruction, often referring to things captured in holy war or under a specific ban, could not be redeemed. It had to be destroyed or, if a person, put to death.
And it mentions the tithe here, too.
Yes, it concludes by stating that the tithe, a tenth of all produce from the land, grain, fruit, and every 10th animal that passes under the shepherd's rod belongs to the Lord. It is holy. It reinforces that principle of returning a portion of God's blessings back to him. It could be redeemed, but again, only by adding a fifth to its value.
Okay. So throughout all these laws, rituals, purity, justice, economics, the text makes it really clear there's a direct link between following them and, well, how things go for the community. What are the stakes? What's the outcome of obedience versus disobedience?
Yeah, this raises that crucial point. Chapter 26 lays out a very clear cause and effect. It's not subtle. Their well-being, their prosperity, their security, it's all presented as intrinsically tied to their faithfulness, to this covenant, to these commands. It leads to these starkly contrasting outcomes, blessings or curses.
Let's start with the positive. What are the blessings promised for obedience?
They're pretty comprehensive. Timely rain, which means abundant crops and food security. Peace in the land, you will lie down and no one will make you afraid. Victory over enemies, increased population, fruitfulness, and perhaps most significantly, God promises his presence. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. I will not abhor you. It's a picture of national flourishing under divine favor.
And it's linked back to the Exodus.
Explicitly, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt so that you would no longer be slaves to the Egyptians. I broke the bars of your yoke and enabled you to walk with heads held high. Obedience is presented as living out the freedom God already gave them.
Okay. But if they don't follow the rules, the curses for disobedience sound, well, terrifying.
They are. It's a grim, escalating picture of societal breakdown. It starts with sudden terror, wasting diseases, fevers, enemies eating their crops, defeat in battle, fleeing even when no one is chasing them.
And it gets worse.
Much worse if they persist. God says, He will break their stubborn pride. The sky will become like iron, the ground like bronze, severe drought and famine. Afflictions will multiply 7 times over. Wild animals will attack their children and livestock. Plague will strike. They'll be besieged by enemies. The famine will become so extreme the text graphically describes people eating the flesh of their own sons and daughters.
That's horrific.
It is. It depicts the complete inversion of blessing. Their high places and sanctuaries will be destroyed, cities left in ruins. Ultimately, they'll be scattered among the nations, living in constant fear and insecurity.
And the land itself.
The land itself will vomit them out, just as it did the previous inhabitants for similar practices. And while they're in exile, the land will finally enjoy its Sabbath years. The rest they failed to give it. It's a devastating picture of covenant failure.
Wow. It's incredibly bleak if they go down that path. Is there any way back? Is there any hope mentioned if they find themselves in exile, scattered like that?
Yes. Remarkably, even after detailing those horrific consequences, the chapter ends with a message of hope for repentance. It doesn't end in total despair. It says that if, while in the land of their enemies, they confess their sins and the sins of their ancestors, their unfaithfulness and hostility, and if their uncircumcised hearts are humbled and they pay for their sin, then
What?
Then God says, I will remember my covenant with Jacob and my covenant with Isaac and my covenant with Abraham, and I will remember the land. Even scattered among enemies, God promises, I will not reject them or abhor them so as to destroy them completely, breaking my covenant with them. I am the Lord their God.
So the covenant holds.
The covenant ultimately holds. God's faithfulness endures even through their unfaithfulness and the resulting judgment. There's always a path back through repentance and humility. That's a crucial part of the message.
Wow. What a journey. We've gone through the book of Leviticus from these incredibly detailed sacred offerings, the meticulous, almost pervasive purity laws, through these profound principles of social justice and into those unique rhythms of their economy and calendar with the Sabbaths and Jubilee. It really is so much more than just a list of obscure rules. It's this comprehensive blueprint for, well, an entire way of life for an ancient people.
So what does this all mean, really? We've definitely seen this intricate framework. It was designed, yes, to establish a holy people set apart, but also, maybe more deeply, to distinguish them from all the nations around them. And through all these detailed regulations covering every part of life to foster this unique, almost intimate relationship with the divine. It's this vision of a society where, as you say, the sacred and the everyday just weren't separate things. They were completely interwoven.
Which really brings us to a final thought, maybe a question for you listening. In our world today, which is obviously vastly different from ancient Israel, what enduring principles, if any, might resonate from a text like Leviticus? Think about ideas of community, how we structure society. Think about justice, fairness, maybe even environmental stewardship, with those ideas of land rest. Or perhaps just what it might mean, in any context, to live a life that's somehow consecrated or set apart, regardless of your specific beliefs. Something to think about.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep getting well informed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.